大家好，我是 Ameerah， 我来自毛里求斯，我是翻译员，我也在北外教外语。Je suis polyglotte, ma langue maternelle est le créole mauricien. Hoy voy a compartir con vosotros la historia de cómo volví a ser políglota. Je peux trouver comment apprendre une nouvelle langue, même dans l'aspect un peu ran, comment nous dire, capable marinissa. Fin manière, get jusqu'à la fin vidéo là, putain tout ça qui nous a posé. Let's get straight to it.
Welcome back to Evolve. Today, we are speaking with Ameerah, who is a professional translator, university lecturer, and content writer, who's going to be telling us how she was able to learn to speak 7 languages. Ameerah, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today.
Thank you, Hakim. It's great to be here.
So yeah, let's dive in.
Mm-hmm.
Could you let us know how many languages do you actually speak?
The accurate answer would be 6.5. But the simpler answer would be 7. So my native language is Mauritian Creole. And then most of my formal education was in English and French. I am a heritage speaker of Hindi and Urdu. These are the ones that I'm hesitant about classifying them as one language or 2 languages. So it's basically, I speak the middle section of Hindustani that's between highly Sanskritic Hindi and very Persian-heavy Urdu. The middle area. In my teens, I learned Spanish and Mandarin Chinese. I also work with them now. So in total, it's 6-ish, 7.
Yeah, we don't need to get into any debates about Hindi, Urdu, but both fascinating languages in their own right. So before we go into, I guess, the techniques and advice you have, could you just tell us the story of how you ended up getting to this point as a polyglot? What's the story, basically?
I think I was just lucky at first because I grew up in a very multicultural country. So the average Mauritian speaks 3 to 4 languages. As I said, I grew up speaking Creole at home, but I used French and English at school. And then I just grew up hearing Hindi and Urdu with the media. I grew up with Indian television. In my teens, when I was 12, I decided to choose Mandarin Chinese at school. So I had been learning Urdu in elementary school. When I went to middle school, I decided, you know what, I'll join the ab initio Mandarin class. And many of my friends couldn't understand why I was doing it because I already had a decent level of Urdu, but I wanted to try something new. So I started learning Mandarin Chinese at 12. I often gave it up because I was busy with other things. So I learned it for a year or 2. Then I had a 2 or 3 year-long break. Then I picked it up again. When I was in my early to mid-20s, I decided that I finally want to learn it properly. So then I actually moved to China for 2 years just to dedicate myself to it. This way I knew that I wouldn't abandon it because I would actually be in China speaking Chinese every day, buying my groceries using Chinese, taking the taxi using Chinese, so I would be forced to commit to it. With Spanish, I started it at 17 for my undergrad degree. There were Spanish and German on offer. At initial level, I picked Spanish kind of randomly. And then I studied it in Mauritius for about 2 to 3 years. Then I did the same thing that I did with Chinese. I moved to Spain for a year for the cultural immersion because Mauritius is a fairly small country and there are very few Spanish and Mandarin Chinese speakers there. It was difficult to get past the B1 or B2 level without any interaction with native speakers. So that's why I decided to spend a few years in Madrid and then in Beijing, just for the full cultural immersion, the full linguistic immersion to really reach that C1, C2 level.
Yeah, because I've been to Mauritius, I've got many Mauritian friends, and although it is a multilingual country, not everyone gets to that really upper echelon of the language that you've acquired. So was there something that started, I mean, you wanted to pick up Mandarin at 12 or 13 and you said, so when did that real passion, I guess, for languages, not only the languages you'd grown up with, where did that come from?
I don't know. I was just always really passionate about languages. Plus, I really like cinema, literature. And for me, learning a language is a way to open doors to more movies to watch, more books to read. I've always really liked traveling as well. So learning a language for me is just a way to make it easier to travel, to meet more people. So it's just a general curiosity about the world, and languages were also my strongest subjects at school. So I feel quite proud of myself because when I was a kid, my dream was to be someone who speaks multiple languages. I remember when I first got access to the internet when I was around 10, I went on websites. Like I remember I went on the websites of BBC Wales to try to pick up some Welsh.
Do you remember any of that?
I think I've already forgotten it. I used to remember the word for elbow.
Oh, so random.
It's been so long though because I was around 10 then. So it's just curiosity about the world, and because languages are the gateway to anything else. So if you want to backpack in rural China, it's useful to speak some Mandarin. If you want to watch Brazilian cinema, it's useful to understand some Portuguese. So for me, languages were always the gateway to the rest of the world, yeah.
And I think it is quite a humble thing of you to say like, oh, I just kind of grew up with French and English as well. Because I know, okay, Mauritian Creole is your mother tongue. But as I said, I've been to Mauritius. I know a lot of Mauritians, and the level of English and French isn't always consistent as well. A lot of people I feel like can communicate with no problem. But even just listening to the English that you're speaking now, even in England, the way that you're speaking in a kind of refined way, how did that, I mean, with French and English even, I know you grew up with them, but I'm sure that you must have put a lot of effort into studying those even from a young age.
A lot of it was largely unconscious. And I think like maybe one key to learning languages is to just be very nerdy and hyper-fixated on things. I think that what happened was when I was a kid, I read a lot in English and I watched many movies in English. There was that constant exposure. So my brain kind of picked it up. And it's also about building an emotional connection with the language you're learning. So in my teens, I read a lot of English poetry. I was a big fan of Sylvia Plath, Seamus Heaney. And I think I built an emotional connection with their poems. I feel like for many Mauritians, English is a language you learn at school. And it's associated with like academic prestige. And they don't really have an intimate personal connection to it. It's more about the language you learn if you want to be a lawyer, or if you want to get good grades at school, if you want to make a good impression at cocktail parties. But when you're still in Mauritius and you haven't moved abroad to study or anything yet, you might not be using English to communicate with non-Mauritians. But I feel like at least with like works of fiction or films or any kinds of TV shows, you have to build an emotional connection with them to really wire your brain to that language. Also, what happened when I was a teenager, I did a lot of creative writing. So when I was 16, I won a poetry prize from the Poetry Society in the UK. So I came here over a summer and I made friends here. So it helped build these memories, and these friendships also developed my relationship to the English language. I think I have less of that relationship to French. With Mauritians, what happens is because our formal education system is bilingual, at one point, every Mauritian either goes the French way or the English way, and it can be completely arbitrary. I know some people who say because they have a cousin in France, and that cousin, they were very close to that cousin, so they will end up speaking more French than English. Or they read a book when they were 11 in French that really marked them. They will end up becoming more francophone than anglophone. And for me, because of the poetry, the trips to the UK when I was a teenager, the attachment to, American movies, so I ended up leaning more towards being an English speaker. I do speak fairly good French, but I don't have that much of an emotional connection to it. And even with Spanish and Chinese, that are languages that I started learning much later in life. So Chinese, around 12 and Spanish around 17. I feel like I managed to build an emotional connection with these languages through when I was a teen. I listened to a lot of like Taiwanese pop music, and I had posters of Taiwanese actors on my wall. It sounds very silly, but it's really part of the journey to building a connection with the language so that the words that you learn in the language get ingrained in your long-term memory rather than short-term one. Because if you're only at school and just only doing grammar exercises to pass the exams, to get something on paper, you're not really building memories with that language. So, but then like my relationship to Spanish and Chinese are also different because they weren't languages I learned when my brain was still fairly like malleable when I was a child. It's if I compare them with Hindi and Urdu, it's like my relationship to Hindi and Urdu is also a little bit odd. They're not languages that I actively use very often. I only ever use them when I watch media from India and Pakistan, or when I travel, or when I go to like an Indian restaurant abroad. But I cannot forget them because I learned them when I was 3 or 4. Because like my family is of South Asian origin, when I was a kid, we watched only Bollywood movies. So I cannot forget movies I watched when I was 5, 6, 7, 8. So I will never forget the words in these movies. So even if I don't actively use it that often, I have such intimate childhood memories connected to these two languages. So yeah.
Yeah, fascinating. I mean, this all started from you saying, oh, it was unconscious, but then we've consciously gone in and broken it down. And you see that even though it's not necessarily you consciously saying, I am going to study now.
Yeah.
All of those hours into the writing, the reading, the movies is just such a huge immersion that, again, the emotional ties has been actually mentioned in quite a few episodes with our guests. So I feel like it's such a powerful point that when you've got that emotional connection to anything, in this case it's language, your brain just holds on to it and retains it. And it seems effortless the way you're saying it, but actually when you break it down, it's actually quite complex that this was you from a young age in a routine doing this stuff over and over and over again, which I feel like a lot of people who want to start from scratch, it's hard, right? When you don't have all the time as a kid and you don't have 10 years of immersion to do, but then you did actually do that with Spanish and Chinese. So I'm actually, let's go into those. Those were the newer languages in your life. So you didn't grow up with those. You didn't have those emotional connections, but you still ended up getting to fluency and using those professionally as well. So can you tell us the journey of those, please?
It's true that I don't have like the emotional connections from childhood with them, but I do have emotional connections and like meaningful experiences with them in adulthood. When I lived in Beijing, when I moved to Beijing, I thought that the other language that I would use the most, apart from Mandarin Chinese, would be English as the kind of what people assume is the universal lingua franca. But Beijing has a huge Latin American population. There are so many Latin American like international students in Beijing. I have never met as many Venezuelans as I've met in China.
Wow.
So
Very interesting. I had no idea about any of this. So.
Because I think because of the diplomatic relationship and like quite many students from Latin America get sponsored to study in China. So what happened on my campus in China is that there weren't many Mauritians. So I ended up getting adopted by the Latin American group.
Okay.
And because I was a Spanish speaker also, because I also spoke Chinese, I often acted as the informal interpreter for any bureaucratic things. I actually met some of my first friends in China with from Colombia and Costa Rica. We actually met in a queue because we were all trying to figure out how Chinese bureaucracy works. Like, where do I get this red stamp? And then to which office do I have to go for the second red stamp? And I just helped them out with the language barrier, and we just started hanging out. And then I met their other friends because language in the end is about community. Learning different languages has meant being able to be welcomed and accepted in different communities. Ones that I don't necessarily have a kind of, a similar ethnic background to, even like a similar childhood to. I had the same experience when I studied in London, because there are many Chinese international students here, sometimes they have a lot of language anxiety about speaking English. So sometimes they will say huddle together among other Chinese students to be able to speak Chinese among themselves. So whenever they meet like a non-Chinese person who is able to talk with them in Chinese instead of requiring them to switch to English all of the time, that can feel very comforting for them, and they become like really welcoming and friendly. So I feel like the different languages I speak over my my adulthood, when I lived in Spain, in China, and most recently in the UK, they've helped me be like kind of adopted into unexpected groups. So even like I was talking about China, so I had like my different friend groups. So I had the Pan Latin American friend group. They even like gave me the nickname Una Costarricense Honoraria, an honorary Costa Rican. So because there were many Costa Ricans in the group. In the UK, I was a regular member of the Latin American house, so they called me una Latina de corazón, like someone whose heart is Latina. Even if I'm not, I was the only non-Latino person in the group. So it's just opened doors to so many, not only so many more trips, books, movies, but just so many friendships, so many conversations, so many like professional contacts, so many experiences. And I just realized that if I didn't speak these languages, I would have missed out on so many experiences that did happen in my life. In China, there was my group of friends, the Pan-Latin American group. And then there was the Francophone group, which was people from France, but also people from all over Africa. Mm-hmm. So that was also another way I could connect with people from Senegal or from Morocco. And we have like very, very different cultural backgrounds, but because we have French in common as a lingua franca, we could bond over that. So I think it's a bit of it's inaccurate to say that English is the only lingua franca, especially if you're traveling or studying or working abroad, because it would depend on the region and the group of people. Different languages can be the connecting bridge. Whenever I meet Brazilians, when I travel, the language that we switch to is Spanish because it's L2 for both of us. So they usually speak English as well, but they tend to be more comfortable with Spanish because it's probably, in most cases, they started learning Spanish first as a first foreign language, and then they started learning English later on in life, maybe in high school. It's easier to just switch to Spanish. So basically with English, French, Creole, Hindi, and Urdu, the ties I have to these languages are tied to my childhood in Mauritius. Mm-hmm. And I spent all my childhood in Mauritius. I only left Mauritius in my early 20s. There are some, say, polyglot Mauritians who, say, had bicultural childhoods. Say they have like one foreign parent. Say they spent half of their childhood in France and then moved back to Mauritius. But in my case, I was in Mauritius for my entire childhood. And I went to public school. I didn't go to like an English-speaking international school or something like that. But then with the memories connected to Spanish and Chinese, these happened in my adulthood. But I still managed to kind of forge friendships and forge an emotional bond to these languages, yeah.
For sure. And I mean, based on what you've just said there, it definitely seems like the connection, the emotional connection from Spanish and Mandarin really came from the people and the community. Mm-hmm. And you've made it very clear about how beneficial that was. Mm-hmm. So I want to go back to something you said before, which was like hyper-fixating on the grammar and that kind of thing as well, because I really, really agree with what you've said. It's so important to be around people and that community that motivates you. Mm-hmm. But if you've only got that, but you haven't got the structural foundations, it's really difficult. So could you go into then, into Spanish and Chinese? Mm-hmm. These are newer languages for you. Yeah, you've told me about like you like to go into language nerd mode and that type of thing. So what was the process of actually learning the formal side of the languages of both Spanish and Mandarin and the grammar and those sort of things? Do you have any particular approach to that?
I've also thought about it a lot because I'm a language teacher. oftentimes students will tell me, oh, I just want to learn the language on a conversational level, but I don't want to do grammar stuff because that's boring, or I don't have time. But then it's like building a house without a solid foundation. So it's like putting a lot of like great interior decoration, but then your house, it's standing on stilts and it will fall apart at the slightest gust of wind. I think it's also inaccurate to see grammar as something very dry, very boring. Maybe it's because, I guess, different education systems are different, but when I was a kid in Mauritius, like grammar was taught in a rote learning manner without really digging deeper into why some things are like this. For example, something that helped me a lot with memorizing Chinese characters was digging into their etymology. So, like, for example, I'm interested in knowing where words related, like which characters are related to warfare, or which characters are related to farming and agriculture, which characters have like a relationship to how gender was in like pre-modern China. So you can actually see that in the characters. And once you see that, it's much more interesting to just copy them 100 times over. When I was learning Spanish, with Spanish, maybe the most challenging part was like the verbs and the conjugations. But because I already spoke French, many of the tenses were slightly similar. So for me, the way I made it interesting was by turning it into a comparative exercise between French and Spanish.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, it was like, aha, this is similar to French. This is different from French. Or like trying to find which words were of Latin root and which words of Greek root, and how that actually changed the form of the word. Or even like try to think about how the way the grammar works possibly influences the way people think in that language. Numbers are said in different languages, possibly influence the way people think about money or think about numbers. So then the grammar becomes a gateway into how people think in a certain culture, rather than something dry and boring. Something that has also helped with grammar is to kind of gamify it. So, when I was at uni and I was learning Spanish, I created these little quizzes on like really old HTML websites where if I got an answer right, I would get 1 point. And if I got an answer wrong, it's -1. So then you kind of get addicted to it. So for example, before every Spanish exam, the night before it, I would create a quiz with all of the verb tenses with about 300 questions. And I would just play through it. And in my mind, I would pretend like it's like Super Mario or something, and I'm gaining hearts or losing hearts. So I think that the trick to making grammar fun to learn is to think of it as an insight into how thought is encrypted or is structured in that language and in the cultures that speak that language. And also to think of it as a game, like mastering it is like reaching level 50 of the game of that language. So, yeah, so I think that's the way to really approach it. When I'm teaching languages, that's always something that comes up at the beginning. People are scared of grammar or ask for like tricks to kind of not learn grammar and go straight to vocabulary or conversations. But there are ways to make it fun. Another example was that I used to teach Mandarin Chinese at a vocational university in Mauritius. And at the beginning, the students were all a little bit intimidated by the language. Plus, they were like 18, 19-year-olds. And many of them, the reason they were attending a vocational university is that they hadn't passed their GCSEs. So they hadn't passed like a GCSE in English or in French. And then they were at uni and suddenly there's Chinese, which seems much harder than English or French. But in the end, most of them ended up getting good grades in class. And what I used to do, especially with Creole and Chinese, both of them are analytic languages. So the grammar depends a lot on syntax, on function words. So what I would do is, like, each time we would speak, I would write the sentence down in Creole on the board as a little formula. Like, for example, well, I'll just say it in Creole. So I would say mot means I plus past particle, particule passé, plus manger, to eat. So I would write it as a little formula on the board, and then they could just consult the formula in Creole and reconstruct it in Chinese, because sometimes the function words were quite similar. For example, in Creole, like verbs aren't conjugated. Say if you want to put a verb in the past, you would just add the function word ti. For example, mo manger, I eat. Mo ti manger, I ate.
Mm-hmm.
So it's the same with Chinese. You add le, wo chi le, I ate. So I would connect ti and le. So it's about making the students aware of how their own native language, how the grammar of their own native language is structured, and then connecting that to the grammar of the new language they're learning. So then it becomes much less intimidating. Yeah.
The key thing you mentioned there that really stuck out for me is that a lot of people do, unfortunately, see grammar as, you use the word dry. Whereas if we can change our perspectives and perceptions to, I'm really excited to study grammar now, which even me saying that, because I know that even within my own, being a university student, I would really look forward to like the speaking class. And it's like, okay, tomorrow's grammar. But you have to do it, right? But whereas if you've got this approach of like excitement to study the history of it, like for example, Urdu and Hindi, you mentioned that Urdu has this kind of more Persian roots. Hindi has more Sanskrit roots. Just knowing that makes me interested more than probably learn this word, learn that word. Oh, okay, Greek words. Wow, you can see the connections. And Spanish has a lot of Arabic origin words. When you understand like this part of the structure comes from here, even in English, it's a Germanic language. So which parts come from these origins and that, you're definitely going to, I feel, have a deeper connection to go back to what you said before. And that can also be applied to the structural side of the language as well for that motivation.
Because you have to see the history behind the grammar, like which languages or which cultures actually like formed that grammar. So what you were saying about Hindi and Urdu, because one of the things that I like to do each time I have a layover in Dubai is that I can't speak Arabic, but then because there are some Arabic words via Persian in Urdu, so I just like listening to the airport announcements in Arabic and just picking up like, oh, musafir, traveler. And then I realized, oh, actually this word in Urdu has Arabic origins via Persian. So it's like, it's about like basically finding ways to create fun games with the grammatical aspect of a language, or just like even things like about like, I'm fascinated by like registers for politeness. Is there like a formal pronoun for you, an informal pronoun for you, or are there like multiple levels of that? So just like digging into that can make grammar really fun.
Maybe you know this because I was the other day I heard I'm not sure if it's Hindi or Urdu, they use the word like ustad.
Yeah, like teacher literally.
Yeah, and that really reminded me of usted.
Yes, that's true.
And I don't know if there's some connection there. Maybe in the comments, people can let us know as well.
I will probably go down a rabbit hole on Google later.
Because you do find these different levels of like formality. In some languages, you have it. In English, in the old English, you're calling people sir and things like that. But it's not as prominent as like French tu and vu.
Exactly.
In Mauritian Creole, you have to and ou.
To and ou, like derived from French, like to informal and ou like vous, like formal.
Yeah, because in reunion though, ou you say to everyone.
Yeah.
It's not formal. They don't use to, they just use ou. So then it's interesting that how in reunion, like anything, right, that you ask, courage à ou.
Okay, yeah.
They're going to use that. That's not considered like super formal.
Yeah, that's standard.
Whereas in Mauritius,
it's
is more like...
Yeah, and it can create like a bit of a distance as well. Like if you're like trying to be friendly with someone, if you use oo, it might come off as cold or... That is true because like each time I listen to like music from Reunion, there are even love songs from Reunion, there's always ooh, 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 but I never... That is true. I guess it's the same with like usted as well in Spanish. I've noticed that across Spanish-speaking countries, for example, when I lived in Spain, we really used usted in super formal situations or with people over 75.
Okay.
So when I use because in my brain I was thinking in Creole, I was calling 40-year-olds usted, and they would get offended because it's like I'm telling them they're old or I'm not being friendly. But in comparison, when I met friends from Costa Rica, they would use usted with everyone, even people their age. So these kinds of, especially with languages that were spread around the globe through colonization and then kind of develop a local variant in every country. So the variations between them are fascinating as well. And you can, again, connect it to grammar. Grammar can be made more fun if you manage to hook it with all of these things about geographical variation, historical roots, things like that. Yeah.
Especially because I know as well again, I don't know the variations too much between Urdu and Hindi, but they use up for you, which is more polite and formal. But I grew up with Punjabi hearing a lot of tu.
Okay.
And then I used tu once. I had an Urdu lesson and the teacher was actually quite annoyed.
Okay.
He said don't use tu. It's very it's quite rude.
Rude, yeah.
But then, I guess depending on which part of the region, whether you're in a family or not, all these things.
Exactly.
If you understand that grammar is also a lifesaver, because if I now I know that, but you could actually offend someone.
Exactly.
If you saying usted there, actually offended one person, but could be really polite to another person. So when you, I guess, I want to say fall in love with those nuances and differences, it can give you that bit of extra motivation to, okay, I'm going to have to look at the jusque parfait or whatever, imperfect subjunctive, and it's a bit tricky at the start. But if I don't do this, I am at risk of maybe making myself offending someone. They might let me off the hook, but then again, you're the honorary Latina now, so they're not going to treat you like the foreigner. You're one of them now, so they might not be as lenient. So
that's true. There seem to be small things, but especially I think that's also the trick to getting from an intermediate level to an advanced level. A lot of the difference between, say, a B2 and a C1 level is understanding these nuances that are really, really closely tied to culture. When I was learning C1 Spanish, I found that the vocabulary lists I had to memorize, the kinds of audios I had to be able to understand weren't that different. The levels weren't that different, but the C1 level required me to have a much more in-depth knowledge of cultural nuances attached to these languages. For example, I needed to know that Argentinians use vos instead of usted, things like that. And the key to mastering these things are through grammar. I feel a grammar you have, it's basically taking, a piece of textile and putting it under the microscope to see how the threads are woven together, or taking a tapestry, turning it over and seeing how it's actually all tied together at the back. Students who are maybe a little bit impatient and really want to get to just speaking the language in, say, 3 to 4 months, is that they see the front of the tapestry where there are no loose threads, but the grammar is the threads holding the whole thing together. So to be able to have the tapestry, or the kind of proficient conversational skills, the proficient cultural skills as well, you need to go through the grammar. Yeah.
You just mentioned Argentina. I was in Italy recently and I met an Argentinian. And again, I've got conversational Spanish to the point where but I can communicate fine. But I learned it in England, which was with the Spanish from Spain. And then the simple question, I just said, how are you? And they say, is it os or vos?
Vos.
And I was like, muy bien, ¿y vos? I was like, vos, what? And it took me a few seconds to recognize, she's asking you as well, right? Because you're not used to it. But then, as you said, I'm a native English speaker. If I hear an American or an Australian, they might use different words to me.
Yeah.
But I'm going to still be able to get by and be aware of it and survive, I guess. So I think that the only way to get to that level that you said is diving into the culture and not being scared to I guess, yeah, a follow-up from this is I was going to say not be scared to make mistakes. Yes. Mm-hmm. How's your relationship with grammatical errors? And some people are very shy of like making a fool of themselves and that kind of thing. How was that for you? I mean, progressing through each of the languages?
I think on one hand, I think it's very important to learn the grammar on paper. But on the other hand, I think like when you actually go out into the world and interact with people, you shouldn't be hyper-fixated on the grammatical mistake. It sounds quite contradictory. Like when you're in the classroom or at home, practice your grammar. But when you go out into the world, if you forget the subjunctive form of a verb or misgender a table or use the wrong formal pronoun at one point, don't overthink it. I used to have a lot of language anxiety in the past. And over time, again, with my interactions with people, I started getting over it. It was especially my interactions with Chinese students from China that helped me get over my language anxiety around speaking Mandarin. Because when I spent a year in London, I befriended quite many Chinese international students. I guess like Chinese would be the weaker of the 5 languages I'm fluent in. I've actively used it less. I mean, when I was in China, yes, but since I left China in 2020, I've used it less. And then I realized that a lot of the time people are just grateful or happy that they're meeting someone who can speak their language and they're not in teacher mode. Say if you're just having a coffee at Costa Coffee with a friend, that friend does not have a blackboard in their mind where they're noting down every single like tone mistake you're making, or if you forgot to add the past particle to a sentence. What's important is being able to communicate. So in real life, prioritize communication and connection over perfection. I've also had a lot of language anxiety around French, which is a bit strange because it's a language I've been speaking since I was a toddler. But that's more tied to like the post-colonial situation in Mauritius because Creole is the language that most people use at home or with their friends. And then if you're going to like a fancy cafe or to a mall or to, a professional event, you're kind of expected to switch to English and French. And French for them is a second language. They might feel like other Mauritians are judging them for a tiny French mistake. But then when I travel and I meet like actual native French speakers, they don't care. So, because like in Mauritius, French is really tied to prestige. So if like in that context, sometimes Mauritians feel that if they make a random grammar mistake, it's not just a grammar mistake. It's a reflection of their social class. It's a reflection of their level of education. It's a reflection of the image they portray to the world. But and I think it took me quite a while to kind of unlearn that and to not feel language anxiety about speaking French. What helped was actually like interacting with native French speakers from Quebec, from France, from different countries of Africa, from Algeria, for whom like French was not a marker of social class, but just a language. It's really about getting rid of all of these complexes and which could be like post-colonial complexes or just like any kind of like perfectionism from academia, and just going into the flow. When you get over that fear of speaking, you will realize that over time your mastery over the grammar when you're speaking will actually get better without you realizing it. Because what happened with Chinese at first is that I was so anxious to use it that the anxiety would kind of block me. So it was like a self-sabotage thing. But once I stopped caring so much about making tone mistakes, over time, say about over 2 weeks, over 3 weeks, over a few months, my tones actually got better because I was less self-conscious about it. Try to seize every opportunity you can get, every opportunity you get to speak the language you're learning. Even if you say it's not for a long period of time, say you're at the airport, you're at the beach, just strike up a conversation with someone. I think it might be easier for me to say because I'm very extroverted. I can make small talk with strangers fairly easily a lot of the time. But try to say, if you meet an international student, if you're transiting through an airport somewhere, even in online spaces, say you're on a Reddit forum and someone asks a question in Spanish, just reply to them in Spanish. Don't worry too much about whether you missed a tilde here or an any there. Just reply to them. And it's the same. And just try to, whenever you're feeling anxious about making mistakes, try to put yourself in the shoes of the other person. Because I realized, for example, with Mauritian Creole, whenever I meet a non-Mauritian who speaks it, I'm not going to correct their accent or Mauritians basically, because it's such a niche language. Whenever we meet any foreigner who made the slightest effort to learn it, it's such an honor and we're so happy. And when Mauritians, whenever they meet any foreigner who speaks a little bit of Mauritian Creole, they just want to talk with the person, invite them to their house to have their mum's curry. So exactly. Moi, si crois mon pas encore désigné ça même. Capable pas trop pense manger. In a nutshell, don't be self-conscious because most of the time, the person at the other end is not mentally correcting you on every mistake. The person is just happy to be able to communicate with you. And a lot of the time, the mistakes you're making, if you're overthinking about them, you're the only one overthinking about them. The person you're talking with isn't really thinking about these mistakes at all. So go for it and grab any opportunity you get to practice the language. So yeah, just talk to people.
It's such a key point because I think anyone who studied a language formally and is used to having tests in that language, you know that if you made a mistake in your French class or English class, you're getting the big 4. You know, it's in your mind, oh my God, I said la instead of la. You're getting the big red X.
Exactly.
And it's internalized.
Yeah.
I mean, my first degree was French and politics. So French had a lot of, I was constantly, I took tests in French for over 10 years. So then what you said about speaking French to Creole people was actually the opposite of me because I kind of felt that si je mélange le créole et le français au même temps avec un pote mauricien, moi j'ai moins peur parce que je me sens plus à l'aise. Mais si je suis avec, par exemple, à l'ONU, quand je travaillais à l'ONU, s'il y avait un Français de souche de la France, moi je me sentais un peu plus
très élevé.
Non, je veux pas faire des erreurs. C'est d'erreurs ou des erreurs?
D'erreurs.
Genre je veux pas faire d'erreurs avec lui, c'est la honte. And it really comes back to how comfortable you feel in those situations because I'm thinking about prestige then. French has this that's one of the reasons I like French is because they do maintain the status of their language, but at the same time, as a learner,
it's a lot of pressure.
We did an episode with a guy who's an Ivorian Korean, and that was in French. And with him, I'm not conscious at all with the accuracy of my French because I feel comfortable. But then, in certain situations, you meet someone and you don't really know them that well. I know I can speak French, but I'm really in that habit of, j'hésite. Should I tell him that I speak French? I'm an extrovert as well, so I always end up speaking French, but there is that in the mind still. It's somewhere at the back, je parle lentement, je monte pas exactement. Même avec toi, maintenant, je sais que t'es language, génie. Donc ça peut être, les gens peuvent se sentir un peu intimidés, ça se dit.
Intimidés, mais c'est ça parce que moi aussi j'ai, on pourrait dire cette barrière psychologique et je ne suis pas sûre si j'ai vraiment pu complètement surmonter cette barrière, mais c'est maintenant mieux que, disons, il y a 10 ans de cela. It's getting better over time. I think it's impossible to ever fully get over the self-consciousness or get over the anxiety of speaking a foreign language, but if you manage to like reduce that anxiety by say 50% or even 30%, that's still an achievement in itself. So it's so difficult to, I guess you mentioned like with the professional situation at the UN where making a mistake while having a chat with someone in a coffee shop as compared to making a language mistake at the UN, two very different contexts. I think like it's like over time you can like kind of like train your brain to unlearn that kind of language anxiety. Actually, have a friend of mine, a Mauritian friend of mine, was doing a PhD in France about language anxiety around French among Mauritians, and it was like it was like so fascinating. About nearly every Mauritian has like kind of like funny anecdote about going into an expensive clothing store and having the saleswoman approach them in French and like panicking and just leaving. So things like that. And also recently a student who's from New Zealand, but I'm teaching him Mauritian Creole because his wife is Mauritian. He made me realize like something like very important that did help me overcome that kind of like psychological fear and also help other students overcome that fear. The thing is like his wife speaks perfect English. But the reason why he wants to learn Creole is to relieve her of the cognitive load of always having to switch to a foreign language. So sometimes now, like, you just have to not think of it as doing a favor for the other person, but just think of it, or even like an act of kindness, that no matter how many mistakes you're making, you're kind of helping the other person by reducing their cognitive load. Like they have the cognitive load of always have, I guess it's an experience for like an experience that many immigrants have of always having to speak in a foreign language, even if they're fluent in it. It becomes tiring because when people are tired or sick or they're really angry, they always switch back to their native language if they need to swear. It's the same like even in Mauritians in the diaspora, even if they speak mainly English and French, when they need to swear at someone, they will switch to Creole. So I think that's like, I think it's the most natural thing. Think of it as, so your mistakes aren't that important. What's more important is that you're being, when you're creating a friendship with someone or even having a business conversation in a professional setting with someone, you're making life easier for that other person by speaking their language, however imperfectly you speak it. Even in a professional context, say you work in international business and you have a Chinese business partner, it's like a very high stakes business dinner. And even if that Chinese business partner speaks very good English, they might still feel more comfortable if you switch to Chinese because that's less stressful for them. It has a lighter cognitive load. They have to spend less time and energy digging around their brain, finding the right English word. So just realize that these mistakes don't matter. What matters is that you're actually making it easier for the other person, not only yourself, for the other person to communicate with you. No matter how, how high register the situation is, whether it's like a business meeting or a UN event or, anything.
I think it's such a refreshing perspective on this. It's the first time I've heard someone mentioned that about the cognitive load, because as a native English speaker, I'm doing this all the time. If I meet someone who I know is a little bit shy in English, I'm constantly thinking in my perspective, how can I make this person feel comfortable speaking English with me? But then when I speak to other people, I'm always thinking super critically, make sure you get the grammar right when speaking to this French person. And I'm not thinking, hopefully they're grateful that I'm speaking French now. And 9 times out of 10, even at the UN with my colleagues, we would just be getting a coffee together. And then I say to them like, I have a degree in French. Oh, let's speak some French.
Exactly.
It's not like they're happy. They're not there to criticize and judge. But on the other hand, I actually do say that once you have that open approach to the criticism, if you have friends who are comfortable to giving you tips, that's actually a really, really useful way. But when you're just having a casual chat, this person's going to be more like impressed, like, wow, how did you know these words, So, and I always try and sprinkle in Creole, the words that I've learned with people because in general, Creole people from Reunion and Mauritius always make me feel comfortable. That tied in with the fact that you mentioned the grammar earlier. Like the more, I don't know if this is the same in Mauritius, but in Reunion, you can say mon for anything. So you can say mon maman.
Okay, yeah, like
how about in
Creole it would be mo, just without the nasal vowel. So
but I think they actually do say mo as well in Reunion as well. I think it depends on the accent of people, but what I'm saying, you don't need the ma.
Yes, no.
Same in in
like it's not gendered at all. So like mo mama, my mom, mo papa, my dad, mo luto, my car. So grammatically it's a I don't know if I could say like simpler, but it's much more straightforward. So it's harder to make a grammar mistake in Creole when it comes to things like gender. Maybe the trickier parts are the syntax and the pronunciation. But again, also the thing is like because Mauritians speak multiple languages, but speak them at different levels and we often joke in Mauritius that we speak 3 languages, but we speak all of them imperfectly. so like I guess like they might be a little bit more lenient towards like non-Mauritians who are like learning a local language. We all speak our own local languages imperfectly. So so like that. And you were mentioning like having a coffee with a colleague at the UN. And I think like even like the most highly educated people, the people with the most like achievements, they would also sometimes like to just switch to the native language, even if they say even like I've also noticed that with like members of the diaspora in the UK, because like say for example I have a friend who like she moved here like 15 years ago or something. So, but still, like, whenever I meet her, she wants to speak Creole. So she's like nearly a native English speaker now. She spent more of her life in the UK than in Mauritius. But there's always that element, and she's like she has degrees from UCL, etc. But it's always like easier, more comforting for her to switch to Creole. So I think it's the same with even like native French speakers at the UN with like tons of degrees. It will create a better connection to just switch to French when speaking with them. So yeah.
I met a Mauritian senior colleague at the UN, and I can't remember what I just said. Qui manière or something, and her reaction was just she could not.
Wow.
She was like, "Hey, a white guy speaking Creole," and I'm like, "Hey, I'm Asian as well, whatever." But it was just like she was so happy. Just a few words sprinkled in because at this point, you're right. Native level English, native level French. She's completely fluent, but you hit people in the corazon, as the word you used earlier, right? When you use that the mother tongue.
Exactly.
And it is something that I will say it again, like Mauritians have, because you did, maybe it makes more sense now to me that you said you grew up learning these languages like imperfectly. That's why I feel so comfortable to use French, use whatever Creole with people from Mauritius because I know they're not really judging me. And ironically, that pushes you forward and you're going to improve because you're thinking, oh no, I'm making mistakes, but it's through that repetition
you have to make the
and
mistakes.
Hearing it, you're going to actually improve more by doing that. And I think that's where us extroverts,
frozen,
that's where I've improved, is that from day one, I just always spoke French to everyone. Even my first trips, 13 years old, we went to like Normandy and Lille. I had a list of expressions on my phone. And I would just try it to people in the street. And some of them were weird phrases, like random things. Like I was a kid. It's like, you have very nice eyes. Vous avez des beaux yeux. I'm like a kid saying this to just the person in the checkout in the thing. Okay, tick, that's the next one. Quel âge avez-vous? Why are you asking me? Why are you asking me my age? Oh, tick, she understood it. Okay, like going through them. But when you have that like fearlessness of a kid, watch how in a few years, you are, suddenly I'm fluent.
Exactly. And without, there's a process to it, but you will, in the moment, you will largely be unaware of it. It's only in hindsight that you will realize, I actually learned it this way. And the thing is, we were saying about the random phrases, it's part of the A1, A2 level in general. It's always funny because we learn the especially language textbooks, they have the most random sentences or even apps. I remember when I was, the first few months I learned Spanish, there was just the sentence, Juan es carpintero. Like, Juan is a carpenter, was just stuck in my
obscure.
head. So,
have you ever met someone where you could use that in context?
Have I ever met someone named Juan who is specifically a carpenter? Each time I would meet like a random uncle and I would tell him like I'm learning Spanish and he would just tell me, can you tell me something in Spanish? I would just spit out, Juan es carpintero. So it's always like, I think in the early stages you learn these really random words. And also like the thing is about like what you were saying about like Mauritians speaking multiple languages but speaking it imperfectly. Like recently read there's a new book of essays by a Mauritian writer, Ariel Saramandi. It's called Portrait of an Island on Fire. And she has like the opening essays called All My Languages, about like how her relationship with all the languages she grew up with. And she talks a lot about code mixing and code switching. And it's true that Mauritians, we tend to we start a sentence in one language, we switch to another language in the middle, and we'll end the sentence in another language. And she mentioned a sentence that it felt so real because I've heard so many people say it so many times. She said, allume l'aircon, je meurs avec sa salaire-là. Or like, turn on the AC, allume l'aircon, mon père mort, il fait chaud, faire chaud. So like we like and I think like in the like school system, whenever people spoke this way, they would tend to get like scolded by the teacher because, you know, you're mixing up the languages. That's not how it is. You're not speaking French properly. We call it sometimes français potis. Français potis like pour French or anglais potis. But it's actually like the way people speak in everyday life. For me, I don't see it as an impure or an imperfect way you actively using language in everyday life. For me, it shows a lot of like linguistic flexibility. It's like kind of like getting your brain used to switching very quickly between different languages. So for me, things like allume l'aircon, mon père mort, en salaire. For me, it's not a mistake. For me, it's a sign that someone has a brain that does language well, because it's a brain that is able to switch between different ways of pronouncing words, different like word orders, different grammar systems very quickly without realizing it. And I think that's why even like language mixes like Spanglish, or I don't see it as something bad or imperfect. For me, it's a reflection of how people actually live, especially like people in the diaspora. Yeah, in Creole, some people, especially I guess in the countryside, they also add Bhojpuri words. So I remember like I had a student I was teaching Chinese to, a 7-year-old girl from the countryside, and she would say the funniest things, and she would add Bhojpuri words to it. So I think she heard it from her grandma. Remember, she would say things like, for someone who's very energetic, she says chul chul. She would always say, "Mon maman dit bien chul chul." And it would sound so funny. And for me, it's not a sign that this child speaks imperfect Creole. It's a sign that this child is a multilingual child who is exposed to many languages, who is exposed to many cultural worlds, who speaks Creole with her parents, hears Bhojpuri from her grandma, speaks French at school, is learning Chinese, and this child has a brain in which multiple worlds can coexist. And I think like that makes also Mauritians immigrate a lot. We have like a brain drain problem. I think there are like more Mauritians in Quebec now than probably in Mauritius itself. And I think like one of the things that makes it easier for us to adapt when we immigrate is because we always mixed our languages back home. We were always kind of internally in our own country migrating between different microcultures, like a kind of like French-speaking microculture, English-speaking microculture, Creole-speaking microculture, Bhojpuri-speaking microculture. Then you turn on the radio, there's Hindi music playing. So because our brains kind of got trained to that. Whenever we, say, move to Germany or Canada, like having to adapt is easier because your brain is already kind of flexible. Making mistakes is a good sign that you're trying, that you're forcing yourself out of your comfort zone, that you belong to multiple linguistic and cultural worlds. I don't know where I read this, probably on some cringe Instagram story or something like that, but it wasn't actually cringe. It said that an accent is a sign of courage. Having an accent when speaking a foreign language or making mistakes when speaking a foreign language is a sign of courage. It means you tried to speak a foreign language. You tried to make another language live inside your body, your brain, your cultural habits. Yeah.
So many good points mentioned there, but you're making me think a lot about my Mauritian friends in the UK, where we would mix, I guess unconsciously, multiple languages in one sentence. You'd start off with, bro, mashallah, Jordi, il fait बहुत garam.
Yes, exactly.
We've used English, Arabic, like Hindi, French, and Creole all in this one sentence, and you're not even thinking about it.
Exactly.
And when you know someone who can understand all of those, it's not just the words. You know that they understand the cultural significance of each one of those. And the fascinating thing for me about Mauritians is that a Mauritian is, by nature, a product of all of those things.
Exactly.
But then individually, you can take the Mauritian into the French environment. They can adapt. You're here right now in England, you got a degree from the UK, can adapt. Put them around the Dead Seas, the South Asians, you can adapt. And it's, of course, then when you have the new environment, Spanish-speaking environment, Chinese-speaking environment, you're like, well, I'm used to this now.
Yeah, you use the same strategies.
I think to bring this back to this conversation about language learning, I would argue that like a musical instrument, the more you do, so the more instruments that you play, the more languages that you pick up.
Absolutely.
Going into a new environment, oh no, I don't know what to say, I'm not speaking perfectly. For a Mauritian, this is part of my daily life.
It's easier.
But for someone who isn't a Mauritian, there's still a lesson I think we can learn here, which is it gets easier with time.
Absolutely. As with anything, also, it's important to think about language learning not as a sprint, but as a marathon. Because what often happens with students I teach is that at the A1 or A2 level, their progress is quite fast, and that makes them really excited, really proud of themselves. And then you hit the B1 slope, where suddenly it's like mountain climbing. At first, there's like a nice path. It's not very steep. And you feel, I can actually hike. And then when you get to the rocky facade, I think it's important to just remain consistent, be patient with it, keep running, keep climbing. And at one point when you say you've managed to climb up the B1, B2 kind of wall, when you reach the, say, C1, C2 level, it's like the same with mountain climbing. It gets flatter again at the top. It's the middle section. I think that many people, they kind of give up around the middle section. It's with other things as well, like learning an instrument as well. Like quite many people, they'll pick up a tune or two. It makes them feel happy about themselves. And then as soon as you start learning a third or fourth tune that's slightly harder, you can get feelings like, I'm bad at this, I'm bad at languages, I don't have the talent for this. And it's not really that. It's really about keeping it slow but consistent. I think maybe that's also an impression that all of these books that say Spanish in 3 months, or they give a bad impression, because it gives the impression that is possible. But like learning a language and becoming fluent in a language is really a question of years. And it's really a question of making the language enter your long-term memory. It shouldn't be just like a summer crash course and then you don't really build any connections with that language. It's about slowly, even, for example, the sense of community or the new communities I was welcomed into thanks to my Spanish and Chinese language skills. That was a question of years. They were friendships that were built over at multiple months or multiple years. So it didn't say I started learning Spanish when I was 17. And then the first time when I lived in Spain, I was 22. So between 17 and 22, it's about 5 years, right? So it's really a journey. It won't happen very quickly in the blink of an eye. Be patient with it. You don't even, I know, like, people have, like, they have jobs, they have, like, they need to cook and do the laundry and stuff. So they might not have time to, say, study a language for a few hours a day. But that doesn't matter. Say if you can study it for, say, 20 minutes a day, every day, consistently, over multiple years, or if you're able to, say, I don't know, if you're, like, learning Chinese and you like buying food from a certain Chinese restaurant, each time you go there, like, talk to the owners and talk to the waiters in Chinese. If you keep doing that for 6 months, for a year, and you add all of that together, it's so many hours of practice, having the faith that these small steps will lead you somewhere. And and just to not just give up or have, like, negative thoughts or self-defeating thoughts at the first hurdle. Because it's true that these first few stages where you're first able to say Juan es carpintero, it feels nice to be able to say un café por favor for the first time. So it gives you a high, a rush. And then you realize that if you want to watch a movie in Spanish, un café por favor isn't enough. You can feel, like, dejected. Oh no, I thought I had mastered this by now. So just be patient with it and stick with it. And it's a question of years. Like I said, it's a marathon, not a sprint.
There's a saying, like, the more you know, the more you realize how much you don't know.
Exactly.
And it is the excited 13-year-old who's learning all these, un croissant s'il vous plaît.
Yeah.
Whoa, she understood me. Yeah. It's the money. Merci. You got to take those wins. And I feel like as you progress, the wins come from deeper, like, expressions. Like, you start learning idioms and proverbs, and you can still get those wins. It just gets more challenging. But yeah, you gotta just keep going.
Because, like, I guess this one is like it's like learning anything. If you're learning a musical instrument, you've picked up a new sport, or I don't know, you've picked up, like, I don't know, pottery making. It's just about the learning process in general. There's always a bit of a high at the beginning, and it's true that you should celebrate them as they are achievements in themselves, but also don't let it be, you know, like, sometimes when it's like having, I don't know, a sugar rush or drinking too much in one night and then crashing the other day. So just, like, try to be careful to not let that initial high lead you to a sudden dip in confidence or a sudden dip in motivation.
Yeah. I mean, it's definitely true, because what you've explained is an entire life of cultural immersion and linguistic immersion, which is going to be full of loads of ups and downs. And I'm sure a lot of demotivating moments as well as happy moments. And you can't escape either of those. You're going to get those incredible moments where you just sit with someone. And I sat on a bus recently in Italy for 3 hours, had a conversation only in Spanish. And I got off that bus thinking, wow, you know, this was amazing. Yeah. But then there are other times I go and meet someone and they're speaking too quickly, using a dialect I'm not familiar with. And I'm thinking, I studied Spanish for all this time and I didn't even understand what they just said. And ça fait partie that's just the name of the game, as we say. So.
C'est ça, mais c'est normal. Je pense que ça fait partie du processus d'apprendre n'importe quoi, que ce soit, comme j'ai dit, que ce soit un instrument, que ce soit une langue. Et l'important, c'est de ne pas complètement abandonner, parce que, par exemple, une erreur que j'ai fait avec le mandarin, c'est que c'est une langue que j'ai commencé à apprendre quand j'avais 12 ans, mais après, je l'ai abandonnée pendant 3-4 ans. And that's when you forget everything and you have to start from scratch again.
Réapprendre.
Réapprendre tout de zéro. So the thing is, like, that it's kind of like I joke with my friends that Mandarin Chinese is basically like an on and off boyfriend for me. So we've been together for a long time and then we keep breaking up and getting back together.
Is it a toxic relationship?
A toxic relationship that has been going on forever. So I think it's just that, like, you know, life happens. Like, I was like, when I was doing my degree, or I had like GCSEs to take, there were other things happening, but just try to keep learning it, even if you reduce the number of hours. say, what I should have done in these 3 to 4 year gaps is to at least keep watching like Taiwanese dramas regularly, or keep going through my old, the old notes. Even if I wasn't taking formal classes, I had this pile of notes and this box of books from my previous classes. Just flip through them on a random weekend. Just keep a diary where I sometimes write a few simple things in Mandarin, just 我是阿梅尔我住在毛里求斯 anything. Just don't I think a mistake would be to completely drop it for an extended amount of time. I mean, if you're dropping it for like a few weeks or like a month or a month and a half, that's fine. So if you're going on holiday, etc., but just try to not drop it completely for an extended amount of time, even if when you don't have that much time because you're busy with other things. Keep in touch with the language in small but impactful ways. Something that it sounds very silly, but I feel like it does work nowadays. Like everyone doom scrolls on their phone. Like when you're on the tube or anything, try to doom scroll in the foreign language. So, for example, for my students who are learning Chinese, I've asked them to download like Douyin and Rednote and Xiaohongshu, just so that when they're like coming back from work and they're stuck in traffic, they're in the bus and they want to doom scroll. Instead of doom scrolling on TikTok, just doom scroll on Xiaohongshu. Or just, there was like a funny, like something that I did with Spanish. It might sound silly, but it does keep you in touch with the language every day. I follow like Mexican meme pages. Okay. And it helps with even with the cultural references, because sometimes there's a meme about a Mexican politician who got arrested for corruption or something. I don't know who this guy is. And then it will lead me to Google him and read his Wikipedia in Spanish while I'm waiting in the queue at the bank. So that's still that's 15 minutes of Spanish practice via memes and a Wikipedia article about an obscure regional politician. So just keep consuming memes, comedy, pop music, anything that's light and easy to digest on a daily basis in that language. And earlier we talked about hyper-fixating on things. I think everyone has some hyper-fixations or some things there, or even I could just call them things you're really fascinated about. Say if you're really into, I don't know, nature documentaries about whales, try to find nature documentaries about whales in that language. Or if you love 90s Disney movies, try to watch them in that language with subtitles on. So just, or if you enjoy cooking, try to watch short recipe videos in that language, so that even when you don't have that much time to take formal classes or to sit down and practice for 3 hours a day, at least there are these things that keep you connected to that language so that you don't completely forget it. And at a later time, when you have more time, then you can pick up classes again.
For sure. I mean, and even in an ideal world, you'd be consistent. Mm-hmm. But let's say life happens.
Yeah,
I mean,
exactly.
in reunion, they always used to say, "T'inquiète, ça arrive." Life happens, but then just because you've taken 2 weeks off, don't beat yourself up about it, because the time spent of, I'm not good enough, I'm so, I'm not consistent. That energy that you're using, if you just put it into consuming some media, you'll get back on track. Exactly. I mean, the brain has its muscle memory as well, that it's going to eventually, you'll be surprised. Like you said, you were a kid watching these Indian shows, those words stay in there.
Oh, absolutely.
The brain hasn't forgotten. It's just put it in a part of storage that's a little bit further down,
area. Yeah.
But it can be reawakened. It's not relearning it, it's just reminding itself of it, right? So
that is true, because that is true. It's I feel like we don't, especially with languages that we lived with for a long time or that we learned as kids, we never really forget them, even if we think we have. Even for Mandarin, when I did drop it for a few years, when I picked it up again, it was easier than, say, starting it from scratch, because some words got reawakened, especially if they were in the long-term memory. And I think that's also the important thing about building emotional connections with the language, because I've noticed that I've never forgotten words that work connected to something meaningful for me. So you were mentioning like Indian movies, because like these are connected to like family memories. It's a bit funny. Like sometimes I don't know like the names of vegetables or fruits in Hindi and Urdu, but I know words like revenge, enemy, father-in-law, dushman, exactly. Like I don't know, estate or dushman, secha, zindabad, like think like
deep words,
deep
not day-to-day words.
Exactly. I have no idea how to say cucumber in Hindi, but I know like I know dushman, zindabad, or just like basic words like kahi, etc. So, but my knowledge of Hindi is very passive. So because I never speak it. I just listen to it sometimes.
So we've spoken about the building blocks, but you actually work in these languages now. So is there anything you can comment on in terms of shifting from being a student to actually being a professional?
Many of the points I talked about earlier are also related to my professional insights, because like I was telling you the things about like students like getting that dip of confidence once they reach the B1 level, or the self-consciousness they feel. They are things that I noticed when I was teaching rather than when I was learning. Like when I was teaching, I just realized, I went through the same thing when I was learning the language. And it's also what I try to do, especially in the Mauritian context where there are all these post-colonial complexes, is making the students aware that all of the languages they know are useful to learn a new language. Especially Creole. What happens in Mauritius is that people tend to underestimate the value of Mauritian Creole. Like each time, like even whenever there's like any initiative to say right now the government is trying to bring Creole into Parliament. So for a long time, only English and French were allowed in Parliament, or introducing Creole at A levels. You will hear people who are native speakers of Creole saying, "Oh, mais Creole, ça qui t'a pour faire ça? Tu parles l'Angleterre, tu pas pour travailler en NHS au Creole." Like, oh, that's just Creole. What will you do with that? If you go to the NHS in England, you can't get work with this. And for me, as someone who works with languages, I've seen the exact opposite situation. For example, my students at the vocational university, the reason why they were able to master Chinese grammar is because they speak Creole, because the grammar is an analytic language. So you can. So my advice is that any language you have, whether it's a language that's largely a vernacular like Creole is, or even a heritage language that you speak in a broken way, which for me would be Hindi and Urdu, all of these languages can act as a toolkit or as a step to learning another language. You just have to see it in a strategic way and to see what value it has. So, for example, when I do teach Mauritian students, I try to make them first think in Creole and then slowly switch to thinking in the foreign language. Because at the beginning, it's hard to immediately think in the foreign language. So, yeah, so like the main point is that you should really value all of the languages that you already know, even if you speak them imperfectly, even if it's a language that's not a prestigious, like, global language. Value it because it will be the most useful tool to learn any other language. I'm not too sure if I answered the question.
No, we've already covered a lot about the work already. So I guess that the final question I'd like to ask you today is, what advice do you have to a new learner, or maybe even if you could go back in time and speak to Ameerah at 10 or 11 years old with all of these different languages in front of her? Do you have any key, like, main things that you wish, like, I wish I'd known that at 10 or 11 years old, or to anyone who's starting from scratch?
Don't underestimate any previous, like, language knowledge that you have. Grammar is important. You need to practice it. Learning a language is a marathon, not a sprint. So you need to be patient with it. Have patience. It's a question of years. Build memories, emotional connections, and a community with these languages. Kind of like you need to balance an effort to master the grammar with the sense of carelessness in everyday life when you're actually speaking it, so that you don't get too anxious and you actually practice it and use it. And to also never forget that a language isn't something that exists in isolation. And I think that's why sometimes things like apps fail at doing, because they present the languages as like a self-contained thing. A language is always about the culture and the community behind it. So if you're learning the language, it means you should be open to that new culture. It's not an ivory tower thing. You should be open to going to a restaurant where food is sold in the language and talking to people. You should be open to thinking about the world in different ways. So learning a language is about like putting yourself out of your comfort zone. You can't say learn French and then when you consume media, you consume only American media. You have to start consuming French media or Canadian media or media from Algeria or from Mauritius. Never forget that like language isn't a self-contained thing. It's always about the culture and the community behind it. And to be able to speak a language fluently, you will have to go into the culture and community.
So, Ameerah, thank you so much for giving us all of this information today. I feel like I've learned a lot, so I'm sure hopefully those watching this have as well. So just a final message to anyone watching this, please do let us know in the comments what you think about this. Are you studying any of the languages that Ameerah speaks? Maybe you have different learning methods. We want to know everything in the comments. Please do hit the like button, share it if you think someone else would benefit from it. And please do also subscribe as it helps us to make more content like this. But until next time, en créole réunionnais, on dit merci à vous, mais je ne connais pas comment dire ça en mauricien.
Simplement, merci. Merci beaucoup.
Merci beaucoup. Merci beaucoup. On est très reconnaissants. Et merci à Zot. On se retrouve dans le prochain épisode.